Welcome to Speak to the Dark Parts, the podcast where we explore real life through the lens of astrology. I'm Kaitlyn, your empowerment coach and astrologer, and your guide on this journey of self-love and acceptance. Are you someone who feels like they don't fit in? Do you know deep down there's more waiting for you on the other side of fear? If so, you're in the right place. Here, we embrace the dark parts, the parts we've been taught to hide, the very parts that make us unique and beautiful, like our sensitivities, insecurities, creativity, and desires. These are the parts we learn to hide in order to fit in and make those around us feel more comfortable while denying our own truth, which leads to shame, anxiety, depression, and finding unhealthy ways to cope with living a life on someone else's terms. Through the wisdom of astrology and our own inner compass, we learn to fall in love with the parts we once wanted to hide, allowing us to shine brightly in a world that needs our light. So, if you know you're destined for more and are ready to break the mold, let's dive in. Here we are, the first episode of the Speak to the Dark Parts podcast. I'm so excited. I've admittedly been putting this off because I've been a little bit scared. It's a new thing for me to show up in this format. So today I'm just ripping the Band-Aid off and we're just doing it. And I thought this would be the perfect episode to start. I polled some of you guys as well. And you guys are really interested in the astrocartography, like the stories of how I got where I am geographically, as well as these stories connected to the astrocartography specifically. So I'm really excited to talk about that. Today, we're going to talk about how I found myself in Thailand, that kind of story that brought me to where I am, and also speak to, if we're speaking to the dark parts, this is where it's going to happen. And honestly, I think that's where this brand, this idea was kind of born from, because I am currently on my Pluto ascendant line. So anyone who knows anything about Pluto, he's the god of the underworld. So we've been some dark places on this line, and I will put a disclaimer out there. These lines are not the same for everyone. It's very dependent on your own unique birth chart. So the way that I experience my Pluto ascendant line is going to be different than the way that somebody else is going to experience it, and that other person and another person, because it depends on your unique chart. Also, Pluto is not a bad thing. Honestly, my Pluto line has changed my life for the better. It wasn't always easy, I will tell you that. Pluto is not easy, but sometimes it is necessary to become more of the person who you were always meant to be. So watch out if anyone says like Pluto's a bad line, don't go to Pluto. This could very well be true for you, but I would recommend getting a reading, getting someone who knows what they're talking about to look at your chart, because Pluto is not bad. Pluto has lessons, and I am so grateful to Pluto for showing me those lessons, because I would not be the person I am today if it was not for my Pluto line. This place changed my life. I would not change it for the world. And if it was not for this, I don't know where I would be today. I'm sure I would not be sitting here in front of you telling you all about it, obviously, but I would not be in a place to support people who are going through dark places. I would not be able to sit here and hold space in the way that I can in my readings, in my programs. I would not be able to hold the depths of the human experience if it were not for Pluto. So Pluto is not bad. Pluto will not hurt you. None of the planets are here to hurt you. They are all here to teach you something. And that's exactly what Pluto did for me. So a little bit of backstory before we get into the Pluto line. A little bit about me. I worked in corporate. I was one of the corporate girlies. I was a CEO's executive assistant in a corporation. I didn't love my job. I didn't hate my job. I was just doing the thing that I thought I was meant to do. And when I say meant to do, it's the thing that everyone else was doing around me. Get the job, get the boyfriend, get the car, try to get married, like do all the things. And then, yes, I am successful because I've done all these things. It didn't turn out that way. I was working in corporate. Life was going well. I had most of my debts paid off other than my truck. I had a pretty new truck. That was like my pride and joy. It was like that thing, that material thing that said, yeah, I made it. Look at me. So I had that. I was renting a home in my favorite city in Canada. I lived in Northwest Territories in Yellowknife. It is my home away from home. It's not where I grew up, but it is where I found myself after dropping out of university, after going to flight attendant school, and that is where I became a flight attendant, and then somehow found myself in corporate. So if you want to hear about that story, I'm happy to tell it. Let me know in the comments below, because yeah, I've had a lot of careers as a Pisces midheaven, and all of them have just offered their own skills. And yeah, I think I still use all of them today. So it was a really good time. I loved Yellowknife. I was in a happy relationship, or so I thought. And the breakup is what kind of put these things in motion. The breakup really offered me an opportunity to follow the dream that I always had. So I always had this dream of traveling Australia. I know it's not Thailand. So how the fuck did we get to Thailand? Stay tuned. My dream was to travel Australia. I had a Lonely Planet. I don't know if you remember the Lonely Planet books. I'm sure they probably still make them. Do they still make books anymore? I don't know. I had a Lonely Planet Australia book on my bookshelf all the time. And this was kind of that thing that I always had. I think we all kind of have one of these things that it's like, if like the thing that kind of pulls you somewhere, it's like, oh, I'd love to travel Australia one day. Oh, like, what if I open a restaurant? Like, oh, like if I didn't have kids, I would do this thing. Or if I had more money, I would do this thing. Or if I had more time, if I could go on more holidays, like whatever the excuses that we make, we all have that one thing that is really calling us, right? So I'd love to hear what that is for you, because I'm always fascinated to know what that one thing is, because I think it's so important to listen to it, whether we act on it right away. Like literally, guys, this Lonely Planet Australia book, I figured out I have 2 of them. I didn't even know I had 2. So it was like, woo, look at those balloons. Where did they come from? So I had 2 of them. I was like waiting for the moment that I could actually follow this dream. It was a bookshelf dream. I didn't even really think of it. I was just going on with my life until the breakup. And this breakup really offered me the opportunity to follow that dream. Like this was the one thing, the relationship that I really thought was going somewhere. I really loved. I still have love for this man and his family, but this was the relationship that I thought maybe I could see myself being in for a long time. And when it ended, it was the opportunity for me to follow my dream. And I'm very grateful for that opportunity, even though it meant a loss of the life that I thought I was striving for, even though it meant losing what I felt was my home, even though it meant losing who I thought was the love of my life. So there was a loss. but I also gained this opportunity to follow my heart, to follow those Lonely Planet books that have been collecting dust on my bookshelves, to just start fresh. This was my opportunity to start fresh. So after the breakup, I started going through my things. I was selling things. I sold my truck, paid off that debt. I was now debt free. Woo! That's probably one of my biggest accomplishments, is becoming debt free, because it really opened up the doors for me to really just like unshackle myself and not to be tied down, not to worry about the bills that were coming out, to really have this the finances to support what I was about to do. Like, I was literally throwing away my life is what it felt like. I had a very good job. Like I said, I was working in corporate. I was very high level corporate. I was making a lot of money, especially for someone who dropped out of university. I was always lucky when it came to careers. I was always lucky when it came to my jobs. And I was lucky. And also, I put myself in those situations where I really believed in myself. I was kind of that delusional one where I really believed in myself, in my abilities, even though I had no idea what the fuck I was doing, but I was making a lot of money. So it felt scary to walk away from that because it felt like a sense of security. And especially for me, I have my son, I have Chiron, I have Mercury, all in the second house. I love to feel secure, and finances make me feel secure. So if anyone has second house placements, you know what I mean. This is very important for a second house person, to have the things, to have the comforts, to have the money to support themselves. Essential. So this was hard to walk away from. It was hard to walk away from a steady paycheck, which is something that I still struggle with. But I sold my things. I put some things in storage. My ex-partner and I did it together. He was very great throughout that process. It was one of the best breakups that I've had, because we were really friends after that experience up until I left. So it was very supportive, and I'm very grateful to him for supporting me through that. So we went through my things. I put some things in storage, sold other things. I was completely debt free. And then I booked a one-way ticket to Australia. Yes. And I applied for my visa actually the year before. It was so strange how all of this was happening. So in 2015, I applied for a visa. I got accepted, and I was like, maybe I'll go, maybe I won't. I don't even remember what prompted me to apply for that visa. Now that I'm looking back, I have no idea what it was. But then 2016 came around, the breakup, everything happened, and I'm like, well, I guess it's time. So I booked the one-way ticket. I went to Australia, and the rest is history. So since that year, I've never really spent a lot of time at home in Canada. I have been traveling around. So I spent the year traveling Australia, which is amazing. I'm also going to put out another episode on that about because I have some astrocartography lines in Australia, and they definitely led me here. And then I went to Bali. I did some yoga in Bali, like people do. And that is where I heard of the town where I've been living most of the past 8 years. So it was very loosey-goosey. I didn't have a plan. But when I made it to Thailand, I fell in love with the place, with people, with the food, with everything. And I just knew it was exactly where I needed to be. It was the beginning of a period in my life that would take me to the depths of hell, all the way back, carrying my soul through the fire, And I'm very grateful to be on the other side of it, because there were moments where it got dark. It got dark. When I got to Thailand, I met this lovely gentleman. We decided to travel up the mountain together. I had this experience where I lost my phone. It was actually what I think was stolen out of my motorbike, and I couldn't find it. I had to email my mom from someone else's email. It was this whole big thing. And then by the end of the night, it was back in my bike under the seat. So I had this phone. It was so scary. Yeah, we had the best time. I still remember the first bar that we walked into together. Those people who worked in the bar became some of my greatest friends. But in that moment, I can still remember my friend's face before he was my friend, telling us that we could come inside and bring our food inside and just enjoy together. That was a moment that stuck with me. But then my friend, that gentleman, decided to leave, and I said, I think I'm going to stay. I think I need to stay here. And that's kind of what happens. If anybody's been here, it's you can get stuck here very easily. And when I say stuck, it's like you just fall in love with the place and it's so hard to leave. If anyone has been here, let me know. But I decided to stay. I remember walking into another bar. I was drinking still at this time, and I am now sober. But this Pluto line really tested me. So a lot of this story is revolved around alcohol. So if there is anybody who maybe gets triggered by that or doesn't want to hear the story around that, there is also mention of like abuse. There's a lot of things that happened. So if you are sensitive to any of those things, use your discretion. But I remember walking into this other bar, and a gentleman, I wouldn't call him a gentleman anymore, but he offered me a drink. And that is where it started. That is the moment when I accepted that drink, that I was in for a ride, that I had no sweet idea what was about to come. I ended up being in a relationship with this guy, and it was a very tumultuous relationship. It was one of the low end of the Pluto energy. He was also a Scorpio. So, which is interesting because I've attracted a lot of Scorpios here on my Pluto line. I've had more relationships with Scorpios, friendships, romantic relationships with Scorpios on this Pluto ascendant line than ever before in my life. So there was definitely lessons coming up around control, around power, around my sense of power, around giving my power away, around alcohol, around the darkness, around substance abuse, around all of the things that bring us either closer to ourselves or farther away from ourselves. The things that we use to cope, the things that we use to get by, all of those things. So when I accepted that drink, that's when it all started. This relationship lasted, I think, a couple of years. He was much older than me as well. And it was definitely a part of my healing around power and authority. We had a very strained relationship. It was also a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun. And I just didn't know myself enough. I didn't trust myself enough that I was putting myself in situations that I thought I was worthy of, and they were not good situations. So in this relationship, there was a lot of nights where I was still out at the bar, or we would be out at the bar together. And I remember one night I went out after because we were fighting and I was driving and I got into a motorbike accident. And I still remember lying on the side of the road. I wasn't able to move. I don't know how long I was out for, but then I came to, and I remember lying on the side of the road. I remember looking up and there was a truck. They were watching me and then they drove away. So it was in that moment that I realized, wow, like I am truly alone. I felt alone. I felt scared. I felt as if I almost felt angry that I had woken up. And I had tried to call my partner at the time. He wasn't answering. He had turned off his phone because he was angry at me for leaving again, which I was a little brat and I totally take accountability for that. I was not the best partner either. But it was really hard to reach out for that one person and them to not be there. So I called a friend that I had remembered seeing, and he came to help me and clean up I still have a scar on my forehead and my nose was bloody. Like I was in pretty rough shape, and he came to help me. He came to clean me up and like make sure that I was okay, which I'm forever grateful for him as well. That's one thing about Thai people is they're very, for the most part, I don't want to generalize either, but it's a very welcoming, a very community minded place where people really look out for one another. So there are so many beautiful people here. And I remember after that night being yelled at because I showed up with my bumps and bruises and all of those things. And yeah, I was shut out after that and I didn't have that support. And then I had to go to the hospital because my wounds were getting infected. Thank God for my friend at the time. She came and sat beside me, but they had to they had to cut off the infection. I really did not value myself. If there's anything that is taken away from this story is I did not value myself. I did not care whether I was alive or dead. There was like, I didn't have that part of me that told me like, this is a dangerous situation. Maybe you shouldn't do it. It was like, I want more. And this is really where my alcoholism kicked up. I would say I always had a problem, but didn't really recognize it was a problem until I was on this Pluto ascendant line, which is another gift that came from the Pluto line that I don't know that I would have gotten that awareness anywhere else. So just something to note if you're thinking about your Pluto line. It really makes the things that you don't want to look at bigger and more apparent. And it's like, hey, maybe you should look at this. Maybe there's a problem. This relationship continued until there was problems that involved the police as well. So there was definitely physical abuse. We had gotten into a fight outside of a bar. And when I say fight, I mean, my friend and I were sitting outside having a conversation after the bar closed, and we were just sitting there. And then my boyfriend at the time showed up and got very angry that I was not at home and started pushing me around. And I was trying to defend myself, and that, yeah, the next day he showed up to my friend's house. I went to my friend's house after that because I wanted to make sure that I was safe. I didn't want to go back to his house because I didn't know what would happen. So I slept on my friend's couch that night, and I remember waking up to the police outside. He was outside with the police. He had gone to the police and brought them to my friend's house so that we could go to the police station They told me to call my other friend who I was speaking with outside the night before. And we were all at the police station. And I don't want to say too much, but we all had to pay a fine for fighting in public. And I do have to be careful of what I say because there are laws around these types of things. So yeah, we had to pay a fine. And then after that, this is when the relationship started to end. There was no going back from what had happened. And the lesson that I gleaned from that was really just, I think that was the moment around those times where I was like, okay, did I recognize there was something wrong? I knew in my relationships there was something wrong at that point. I was like, this is not okay. There's something that I'm missing. But I still, at that point, didn't really care fully about myself enough to really do anything. I acted out. I did all of those things that just, yeah, I just spent more time with my friends. I spent more time going out. I spent more time drinking, but as a single woman. So after that was when I started, yeah, hanging out more with my friends. I don't know if it was more or just hanging out with my friends at that point because I was really out in that community. I say community because there was a big group of people who, anytime I wanted to go out, there were people out there, which felt supportive at the time, but looking back now, it really was not supportive at all. And I think we all understand why. It's like, okay, those people are always ready to party. There's always someone out there, but the depth of connection is lacking. We are just all trying to run away from a part of ourselves that we haven't really figured out yet. So there's this sense of like belonging, but it's not true belonging. So this is another lesson that this Pluto line really brought out for me. It's like, where do you belong? Who are you? What are your values? Like, who is Kaitlyn deep down? So after this relationship, I would say a year passed, maybe a year, half a year until I met my next partner, which was interesting as well. Another Scorpio on my Pluto line. You can't make this shit up. I definitely had some Scorpio lessons to learn. So this idea of authenticity, facing the truth, facing myself in reflection to another person. The universe was going to make sure that I was going to learn this in one way or another. And with this next partner, it happened. So again, it was not a healthy relationship, but the lessons that I learned were very, very, like, I'm so grateful. And in this relationship, this was actually the relationship where I quit drinking and I got sober and we did it together. I don't know where he is now. I don't know what his life is like. So I can't speak for him. I wouldn't want to speak for him on this public platform either, but he was really that catalyst for me and my sobriety. So we were together up until like 2019 until 2021 after the pandemic, which was really challenging for me as well because we were together, we lived together. I was supporting him financially, which was also challenging. And now that I'm looking back, I see what was going on there within me because I really wanted that love. I really wanted to care for someone more than I cared for myself, even though that wasn't like my intention. It's what happened. there was a lot of things that came up in that relationship as well. This is when I started like veering from alcohol. I also was smoking a lot of weed. I was like dabbling in other drugs as well. But it was really, again, this like control issue in the relationship. So I didn't want to be controlled. I wanted to be my own person, but I was also doing that at the expense of someone else's feelings, which is really hard to come to terms with, like within myself, because in my mind, I didn't want to hurt somebody else, but my actions were doing exactly that. I was hurting someone else. And all because of this power struggle. Like there was this power struggle that really came out with me on this Pluto line. And I was faced with that multiple times. And until I really dug deep, which is what this second relationship was really the catalyst to. So it was right before the pandemic, March of 2020. We were sitting at the bar, not the bar, it was a restaurant, and we were sharing one big beer together. And we just looked at each other in that moment like, is this it? Like, are we done? Are we done drinking? I don't know where that feeling came from, but for about half a year before that, in 2019 was when I started getting sick. It was the summer of 2019 that I was in the south of Thailand and I had passed out, had a seizure in the middle of a bar floor. And even then, even then I didn't go to the hospital. I did not value myself. So we can see there's this theme. There's this theme of power, control, authority, not valuing myself. There's a theme. And I woke up after passing out on the floor. My friend was holding me from behind. I woke up. My other friend was standing in front of me like, what the fuck just happened? I could tell that there was definitely something going on and I had missed the whole thing. So I woke up and then I was like, oh my goodness, like what just happened? And moments before I passed out, I remember looking at my friend like, I don't feel so good. Like I'm gonna go lay over there, because there was chairs like where you could lay and just chill. And then I remember going to stand up. I'm like, nope, not gonna make it. And then I just passed out. So after I woke up, I made it over to that area just to rest. I still didn't go to the hospital. It wasn't until a few months later when those symptoms kept coming up. So I got back to the town in the north where I live. I went out. I remember going for dinner with some friends. There was a friend who was leaving. He was going back home. And I remember going to the toilet and just power puking. I felt like I was going to pass out again. Like every time that I left the house, I didn't know what was going to happen. I became so fearful of leaving the house. I remember being in that bathroom, power puking. I went to the hospital. They gave me some electrolytes and said, "You're fine." I was not fine. So it was that point when I was like, oh, there's something seriously wrong here. It was at that point that I was like, okay, I'm going to go to the city, because the town that I live is pretty small. The healthcare system is not the greatest. I decided I was going to go to the city. My great friend was there to support me through it all. She came down with me, but I went to do some tests. I went to do like the MRI, the EKG, all of the things that whatever they do, and nothing was wrong. Everything came back clear. I was in the hospital overnight. I think it was one night, maybe 2 nights, and nothing was wrong. So that was when they referred me to psych. And I went to psych after. I left my passport there because I couldn't pay for it. I didn't have any money to pay for it. So I had to leave my passport at the hospital. And then I came back, I think it was a week later, to pay for my bill. and to do a follow-up, and the follow-up was with psych. So that was when I was diagnosed with panic disorder, insomnia, middle insomnia, and depression. After she asked me about 3 questions and then just sent me off with a bunch of pills. And I'm not knocking medication because I understand that it is a very valuable tool. The problem that I have is when it's given so freely without a follow-up plan, without other options, without the teamwork to try to figure out like what's underneath all of this. Medication is a great tool. And I used some of the medication, like the sleeping pills that she gave me. I definitely used that when I needed it, but I knew deep in my being that there was something more that I could do. That was when, like, the moment that I walked out of that psych room with the doctor, I was like, no, there's something that I can do to improve my life. So it was only after I got sick, it was only after I spent 3 questions worth of a 30-minute consultation with a psychiatrist that I decided there is something more that I need to do, and I need to take myself seriously. I need to take my health seriously because this is not fun and games anymore. And it was at that moment that I decided to do better for myself. So when I got back, I had no idea where to start. I felt like I was right back at square one, but it was great. And when I say it was great, I say that because it was a period of like trial and error. It was empowering in a sense because I felt so disempowered by the whole situation of getting sick, of not being able to have any answers. Like for the doctors to not be able to tell me what was wrong, I had almost wished like I had epilepsy. I was like, there has to be an answer for this. There was nothing. There was nothing. And I think that was so disempowering that I was then empowered to find a reason, to find like the why. I have always been someone who asks questions, who is like, there's more, like that's not the whole story, like there's something more. And this was really one of those moments where that got activated in me. And that's another Pluto thing where like Pluto is power. So digging up that power, if we think of like Persephone and Hades, that myth, there's a lot of power involved. And a lot of my relationships very much had that like similar vibe of Persephone and Hades, the god of the underworld. It was this sense of power of being like controlled, captive, but then like being able to find empowerment out of this dark, dark place was really what kept me going. And then I felt like I had a mission. I was like, this is like challenge accepted. I will find out what's wrong with me if you're not going to tell me what's wrong with me. So this was the beginning of a very long journey. Like I said, this was in 2019. And then in the beginning of 2020 was when I had decided that sobriety was here. It was happening. So I took a mindfulness-based stress reduction course from Jen Johnson. It was very amazing. I got back into yoga, which is something I didn't even talk about. At this point, I was already a yoga teacher. I was a 200-hour yoga teacher. I was registered with Yoga Alliance, but I was not living that life. I was not living the yogic path. I was not doing any of that. But during this mindfulness-based stress reduction course is when I came back to that. So this was the period where it brought me back to these more mindfulness practices that I had left to the wayside. I started journaling. I started doing yoga a little bit every day. I started meditating again. I really tried to take care of myself step by step. And it was during this time that I remember teaching English online in a setting very similar to this, although I was sitting on my bedroom floor. I remember having a bottle of beer under my desk and a homemade bong on my desk, and I would teach a 25-minute class. And then I would hit the bong, drink the beer in my 5-minute break before I would get into another class. And this was even after being sick. So it was a very long road to sobriety. I knew what had to be done, but sometimes when it, like in those moments where, like between not being aware to the awareness and actually doing the thing, there's this time frame that it takes some time to get from one place to the next. So we can see where we need to go, but we're not quite sure of the path to get there. We've never done that before. We know what needs to happen, but we don't know how to get there. And that was that point for me when I had gotten sick. I saw where I needed to be, but I had no idea how to get there. And I was very scared to let go of everything that I was holding on to, which was the alcohol, the shallow friendships that felt like belonging, the weed, the relationship that I knew was not good for me, even though it was a lot better than the last one. So there was this version of me that I was, and then I saw a version of me that could be. And I'm like, how do I become that person that doesn't need alcohol, that loves herself unconditionally, that honors the parts of her that she's tried to hide her whole fucking life, who has tools in her tool belt to cope with the stresses of life and to stay grounded during times of chaos and struggle. I didn't know how to become that person. So this mindfulness-based stress reduction course was that first step for me. And honestly, I'm pretty sure that is what started what was to come. So I committed as much as I could to that course. I didn't do it perfectly. I gave myself some grace. I remember in the middle of that course as well, I had hit such a rock bottom that, and I haven't really said this out loud before, and I might not keep it in here, but it was during that course that I had actually written my letter. That was, it was during that course that I wrote my suicide note. And I remember being so, I remember feeling so defeated that I just, like, I was tired. I was tired of fighting. I was tired because at that point, and I think like the Pluto energy is very much like that. It's like it almost feels like you're clawing your way out. It's like, how do I, like, it's like the nails on a chalkboard, like the nails going down the side of the cliff as you're like holding on. It's like, I know I need to let go. I need to surrender, but like, which way is the surrender going to take me? So after that, is it all shifted. Like, I just kept showing up for myself in the smallest ways that I could imagine. Now looking back, they were huge ways. I would be doing yoga in the middle of the day instead of or adjacent to like smoking a lot of weed as well. I was still drinking at that point, but I was toning it down a lot. I was trying to reach for different mechanisms, different coping mechanisms like yoga, like my journaling. And then not long after that was when word of the pandemic started coming. So we heard of it here. It was much more serious here before it being in the West. I remember looking, it was January, and I was still teaching English online and like the kids, because I was teaching English to kids in China and they were talking about it, and it was a very big deal. So I think I got a little bit of a forewarning. But I remember being in those first few months, so January, February, March. March was when I made the call to book a flight home and leave my partner, leave my dog without knowing when I would be coming back, which was also very hard. There was the sense of just like, this was that surrender as well. Like, I'm surrendering to everything that is out of my control. So this is another one of those themes that show up on that Pluto line, where surrendering and control, and like, how is your relationship to control? So this was another, I would say, test of my relationship with control, because clearly I cannot control a pandemic. I cannot control any of that stuff. All I can do is listen to what's right for me. And it was in those moments that I booked a ticket, a one-way ticket. I think it was a one-way ticket. I might have booked, I don't know, I forget now. But I booked a ticket home, and I was isolating at home. My anxiety was at an all-time high. I had gotten more anxiety medication. I still hadn't taken the last ones, but there was a part of me that was feeling really like, can I do this alone? Can I do this without medication? But I got another bottle of pills. I sat with that bottle of pills. I had conversations with that bottle of pills. And it just felt good to know that they were there, to know that if I decided that that was the path I wanted to take, they were there. And that was almost comforting in itself. I didn't take them. But again, I will say that if that is the path you choose, that is the perfect path for you. But when I was at home, this is when I started my Instagram, actually. I had moved from my private personal Instagram to another one when I started Yoga Girls. She was doing some sort of challenge, and I was at home alone in the woods with nothing but the cat. And my mom could come visit me like when I had a panic attack, but we couldn't even touch each other or hug each other, which was a whole other thing. It was rough, guys. Like, and I know the pandemic was rough for a lot of people, but like, especially for those who struggle with anxiety or depression or like things like that, my heart goes out to you, because that time was not an easy time. So it was in those, I was spent 10 months at home, which was the longest that I've spent at home in probably the past 8 years, 10 years. That was the continuation of my healing. I really needed to be alone during that time. it was really hard to be separated from my home here at that time as well. But I really needed that space to be in my own space to explore. So that's when I started to explore astrology. I started to explore, I was going to start teaching yoga. I'm like, wow, like I'm really feeling the yoga thing. I was doing yoga every damn day. That was the one thing. Like I was jacked, guys. Like I was doing yoga every fucking day. That was my saving grace. Every day I would do yoga. And I started living more of that like yogic path, like more than just the asana. I was like getting back into that sense of like all around just mindful living again and being more in touch with the nature around me, being near the water, the river, and in like the forest, the trees. It was literally like my mom's house is this cabin in the woods. So it's like exactly where you want to be during a pandemic. It was then when I started learning a lot. I started learning a lot about myself. And that's when I took Deborah Silverman's astrology school, which is what kicked off my astrology knowledge in a more serious way. And it saved my life. It saved my life. Astrology is that piece that I was missing. And the reason I say that is because astrology brought me back to who I am. It allowed me to see myself outside of myself, to turn on the observer, to watch myself, to really objectively see the story that I was playing, the piece that I was playing in my own life, the stories of my past that were playing out today. I was able to go back and think about all of the moments that were really formative to me and the moments where I was still stuck. So learning astrology was definitely the catalyst to my healing. It was what kept me sober as well. At this point, I had quit drinking, but I was still smoking weed a little bit until that just also fell away. So the more that I got to know myself on that depth, that deep level, that Pluto, deep, juicy, intimate, loving, like honoring all parts of myself, which is why this podcast is called Speak to the Dark Parts, because I believe without making friends with the parts that we have suppressed, have kept hidden, have been ashamed of, have like blocked out and have masked, until we bring those to the light, we are living in that perpetual cycle of just not, it's not a loving place. So when we hold that shame, we're not being our true selves because we're hiding parts of ourselves that really are the parts that make us so lovable. So without even knowing it, that's kind of what was born back then. It was the beginning of that journey of loving all of the parts of myself. And astrology really opened that door for me. So at that point, I had no idea I was living on my Pluto line. Maybe if I had known, I would have been a little scared to go there. But I'm very happy with how it happened. And it was very synchronistic. I'm actually writing a piece on my Substack about the synchronicities of finding myself in Thailand. So I'd love if you read it. I thought it was a very cool full circle moment when I realized, wow, the universe really was conspiring to get me here. So I wouldn't change it for the world. But coming back to Thailand after the pandemic, I was a different person. I was sober completely. I knew myself better than I've known myself ever. I had started my business and I was committed to just living a better life. And then when I came back here, it was a little bit discombobulating because I I was not the same person. And again, this Pluto theme, this Pluto idea of like death and rebirth. I had died and been reborn, is what it really felt like. So trying to integrate back into the community as a different person was really hard for me. And it was really hard to be around people who were still living the way that I had moved away from. I didn't know where I fit anymore, but I was also more sure of myself that I knew I did not want to go back down that path. So I definitely isolated a lot more. Now it's 2024, the beginning of 2024, and I'm still kind of figuring that out. Like, how do I fit in this place as this version of me? So it's not fast. Pluto work is not fast, guys. Like, Pluto is the slowest moving planet in the sky. It takes a long time. It's slow burn. And I'm still very much in it, which is interesting because I've just gone through another breakup. And every time I go through a breakup, I feel like, okay, time to get off the Pluto line. And it just doesn't feel right yet. It does not feel right yet. So there's still some lessons that needs to be had on the Pluto line. Each level, there's like a new mirror, if I could put it that way. Like, okay, the mirror flipped to me when I got sick. Then I healed that as best as I could. And then it's like, okay, a new mirror when I'm home and isolated and trying to get sober. Okay, I'm sober. And then I come back to Thailand in a community that feels the same as it was before, but I'm a new person. Okay, there's a mirror. Like, look at yourself again, girl. So now we're in that again, like, where do I fit? Where is my community? How do I stay true to myself first and honor my truth first and surrender again? It's just like that surrendering of knowing I am where I'm meant to be, trusting that I'm where I'm meant to be, because there's also this period recently where I'm like feeling as though, hey, I need to get out of here, but I have no clarity of where I want to go. So I'm like trying to force this clarity, and then I'm like, whoa, surrender. So sit back. If it's not clear, there's a reason that it's not clear. So I'm still here, still trying to trust what the fuck is my next step, and we'll see how it goes. But until then, we're still working with Pluto. So if anyone tells you not to come to your Pluto line, don't listen to them. Get a reading. Think about the part of your life that you're in. If you're ready to face your true self, Pluto may be for you. Don't fear it, guys. Like, there's no fear to be had. There's no good, there's no bad. It's all an experience. There's this presence that Pluto requires, because when we're not present, it's very much like the old version of me, the before I was reborn version of me, where it can be very consuming and you can get lost in the sauce. But if you are in an area where you're ready to face those parts of yourself, the darker parts, the parts that are suppressed, Pluto may be a good place to be. I will never say don't go to your Pluto line, because I would not be who I am today without it. And I owe my life to this place. Like, I really became, it's like that butterfly, like the butterfly, caterpillar to butterfly life cycle that's very Plutonic. It's like the caterpillar crawling in and like cocooning and chilling in the chrysalis, and then it's just goo. There is a moment where you're just goo, and then you have to trust that, okay, I'm either going to die or I'm going to be reborn as a beautiful butterfly. And if we can trust and surrender through the pain, through the discomfort, through everything that is dark and gloomy and challenging, if we can get through that, then there's something beautiful on the other side. We can come out of the chrysalis as a beautiful butterfly. And that beautiful butterfly is just that much more true to itself. And it's like, that's what this Pluto line has been for me up until now, this experience of like, I was giving my power away and now it's come full circle and I am the holder of my power. There is nothing that will take that power from me again. So I am very sure of myself. I am very loving towards myself. I honor myself. And it's all because of the things that I've gone through in this place on my astrocartography map. So if you want to learn more about your astrocartography, let me know. If you know your astrocartography, let me know where you're living. Are you on a line right now? Are you thinking about going somewhere? If there's anything that's coming up as you're listening to this, let me know. Let's talk about it. Let's have a conversation because I love this stuff. I'm going to bring more of it to you, talking about the different lines that I've lived on. So let me know where you're at. Let me know what line you're on. Let me know about your experience. I'd love to have that conversation with you. But until next time, thanks for joining me. With love, Kaitlyn.